Racism Resource Center, known as HARC. On behalf of HARC and our partners, Afro Canadian Caribbean Association, City of Hamilton, Disability Justice Network of Ontario, Hamilton Community Legal Clinic, Hamilton Students for Justice, McMaster University School of Social Work, and especially Hamilton Center for Civic Inclusion, who have organized this event, we would like to welcome everyone to today's roundtable discussion on systemic racism, poverty, and disability rights. We start this event by acknowledging the lands we are on. The City of Hamilton is situated upon the traditional territories of the Erie, Neutral Huron-Wendat, Haudenosaunee, and Mississaugas. This land is covered by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement between the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe to share and care for the resources around the Great Lakes. We further acknowledge that this land is covered by the Between the Lakes Purchase 1792 between the Crown and the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. Today, the City of Hamilton is home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island. We stand in solidarity and we recognize that we must do more to learn about the rich history of this land so that we can better understand our roles as residents, neighbors, partners, and caretakers. The City of Hamilton has developed an Indigenous urban strategy, and we ask residents of Hamilton to read the final report and find ways to participate in realizing meaningful reconciliation. This evening, we will be talking to candidates running to represent Hamilton Mountain. In alphabetical order, welcome Malcolm Allen from the New Democratic Party and Lisa Hefner from the Liberal Party. The Conservative Party candidate sends their regrets. The purpose of this event is to make an informed decision when voting for the person you want to represent your riding. The structure of the event: each candidate gets 5 minutes to talk about the party's platform concerning systemic racism, poverty, and disability rights. Each candidate gets to respond to any comments made by another candidate. Moderating organization will get to ask candidates questions. Questions and answers from the audience will follow. I ask that everyone please respect each other's time and space, as I will call your name in alphabetical order to share your party's platform, which you can also see on our PowerPoint. Malcolm Allen, your time of 5 minutes to share your party's platform begins.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you for the opportunity to speak to folks this evening on the three topics that you mentioned, which are extremely important, obviously, to all Canadians and to those of us who wish to be elected officials and be policymakers and want to advance different policies around those particular issues. You know, when it comes to poverty, it was a former leader of my party, Ed Broad, who actually passed the motion in the House of Commons to call for the eradication of poverty in this country by the year 2000. Unfortunately, it's 21 years later, and we still see poverty at high levels that just are unsustainable for Canadians across the country and are really a stain on our society. And so we need to commit ourselves to the eradication of poverty. And there has to be a number of ways to do that. One of the ways to do it is around the housing issue. There are too many folks in this country who live without homes. You know, too often we hear, well, we can't house everyone. We can't fix that problem. Well, I think we need to look to Finland, where they literally fixed the homelessness issue. They don't have a homelessness issue because they decided that they were going to actually house people. They were going to make it a right, that people had the right to have a home. And so what we need to do is, in this country, and what New Democrats believe we need to do in this country, is make housing a right. You should have a right to live in a home, a secure place that is yours, that belongs to you, that you can call home, you can establish yourself. Because as many poverty activists will tell us, it is with a home that we can then address the other issues that affect those who live in poverty. Along with the issue of a home, we actually need to make sure that an income that actually takes them out of poverty. And so looking at a guaranteed livable income is something that we need to do in this country. You know, if COVID has taught us anything this last 12 to 18 months, is that we can actually come up with programs that are financial in nature that actually help people survive through a time where they were actually unemployed. And I'm sure all of us know, perhaps have family members or friends across this country who were literally out of work because of COVID with no income. And yet we were able to provide that income through a government policy, but it's a temporary policy. We need to look at that in a more permanent way that actually drives people out of poverty. And when it comes to racism, we have to accept and acknowledge that there is systemic racism in this society and right across this country. And what we have to actually do is stop talking about it. For too long, we've talked about, yes, we know there's systemic racism, but we haven't done anything about it. We actually have to step up to the plate and start to do those things. One of the ways to do that is the issue of carding. The federal responsibilities for the RCMP, we have to instruct the RCMP that carding ends. Should have ended a long time ago, but it has to end. It has to end now. Any of the information they've pulled through carding has to simply be removed. It's an unbelievable thing to have to understand that racialized people have the potential to be carded. And at the same time, I could walk down the same street. I don't have to think about being carded because I happen to look the way I look. That has to end. There's no difference between us as humans, and we have to actually build towards that equality. And the way to build towards equality is to end systemic racism in this country. When it comes to disability, for too often, those are folks who've been in the shadows that we haven't seen, we haven't recognized in the sense of what do we do to actually help them to lift them out of the places that they are. Too often they're marginalized, they're not housed sufficiently, they live on the margins when it comes to economics. We actually have to make sure that we lift them out of there. A guaranteed livable income would actually take them out of there. A guarantee of a right to housing will bring them out of there. So we have to continue to look at all of those things in a holistic way that says all of these folks need to be, as a society, brought forward and integrated into a mainstream that some of us just understand that we can have. Why can't all of us have the same? Why are we not all treated the same? We have an egalitarian society. We actually have to believe we can work towards that and do it. Unfortunately, we haven't. We've talked about it a great deal for a very long time, and we actually have to stop doing that. We actually have to have things in effect that make a change. And thank you for allowing me the extra 10 seconds.
Thank you, Malcolm. Lisa Hepner, your time of 5 minutes to share your party's platform begins.
Thank you very much. I want to first off thank very much my fellow candidate for attending tonight, as well as the many organizations who have been involved in the discussion and the invitation to attend, and of course to the Hamilton Center for Civic Inclusion for arranging this very important forum. And it's important to say right off the top, first and foremost, that I am here to listen. For more than 20 years, it's been my profession to listen actively, to understand realities that I have not faced directly, to recognize barriers that might exist for Hamiltonians trying to make their way, and to be an advocate for those whose voices might not be heard, or perhaps not heard for what they're truly saying. I have seen how those who are facing poverty or who have to manage both income and housing insecurity also deal with serious impacts to their mental and physical health. I've seen the impact on communities and how supports that address these issues also make life-changing differences. I've seen how the issue of systemic racism, the insufficient recognition of persons with disabilities, the need for serious conversation on justice reform. I've seen how these issues impact communities and how communities are strengthened and rebound when supports are made available and lasting solutions are co-developed. I know that words like allies and accomplices can be thrown around too casually and by persons who don't fully appreciate their importance. We're here to talk about serious action and honest representation, and I am not here to misrepresent these important roles. These are roles that cannot simply be claimed. They must be earned, and the first step is to be present and to hear from participants. I know I'm coming from a position of privilege. I know my responsibility as a leader in the community would be to hear the concerns of residents in the riding, to work cooperatively with all MPs from Hamilton, and to be the person that listens and then acts. This is my commitment to those who are listening today. But I'm also here as a Liberal, as someone who chose the party that best aligns with my values and priorities, that sees what's already been done to address the issues we're here to talk about tonight, as well as how we will do even more for those people of Hamilton. This election will be close in dozens of races across Canada. Every vote will matter. And I say this because I look at the accomplishments of the last 6 years, the platform that we've presented for the future, and I see myself making a real contribution to this community. And that includes building civic engagement through outreach to a broad variety of communities so that we're building a recovery that takes into account Hamilton's many diverse facets. And we will get to, I'm sure, many aspects of the platform of the Liberal Party of Canada. It's the only choice for progressive voters, everything from Bill C-81, the Accessible Canada Act, the Housing Bill of Rights that protects people buying and selling their homes, the $72 billion national housing strategy already implemented. Hamilton Mountain has a real chance in this election at electing a member of government who can not only call for change, but act and affect change. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. Now this is the fun part. The both of you have 5 minutes to do one rebuttal to each other. And we will begin. I'm just looking at the clock to be fair now. Any of you have an opportunity, so you can just start.
Well, thank you very much. And I thank Lisa for her opening remarks. And I would, look at the Liberal plan around the Housing Bill of Rights. It talks about the protection of those who actually own a home. It doesn't talk about people having the right to own a home, which is a totally different thing. When one owns a home and actually has a sense of protection, one actually has a stake in the game in the sense that they have a roof over their head and they're secure. What about the thousands, in fact, the tens of thousands across this country who do not have a home, who do not have security of a roof over their head? There's nothing inside the Liberal Bill of Rights that talks about making sure that those individuals will indeed have a secure place to call their home, actually have a roof over their head during the winter that's coming, or have a roof over their head tonight and are looking for a place perhaps out in the street. Nothing inside the Liberals' Bill of Rights addresses that issue. And yet it's trumpeted by the Liberals as being some sort of panacea for people that are homeless. It has nothing to do with people being homeless. It has everything to do with people who already have a share of the market because they own a home. So really, at the end of the day, it is about making sure that folks who are homeless, who are on the margins, who really need protection, they need a Bill of Rights that says you have a right to a home, full stop.
Thank you for that, Malcolm. As someone who has been actively involved with YWCA Hamilton for more than a decade, of course, I am very well informed about the plight of unhoused people in Hamilton and the efforts of organizations like the YWCA and INWELL to build all kinds of new housing for vulnerable people and affordable housing here in the city. The Liberal government of Canada has made hundreds of millions of dollars in investments into spaces just here in Hamilton. So that's another part of the platform, building 1.4 million homes and building more space for people who are unhoused, or people who lack housing, or people who can't afford housing. There's also a rent-to-own program. There's more incentives for first-time home buyers to actually get into the market so they can be homeowners. There are many facets of the plan. 100,000 new renovations of homes. So the Liberal plan is multifaceted. There are many parts to it. The Homeowners Bill of Rights is just one thing that we have in there, but it also involves building homes and investing in affordable homes and making rents more affordable for people.
Thank you.
We actually made an announcement just, I think, 6 weeks ago in Brampton, declaring that there was going to be 370 new units built, he called quote unquote affordable. And when the numbers were done by the outside agencies, it turned out there were only 72 out of the 370. His recent announcement that was announced in Ancaster is talking about market rents and market forces. So you're building affordable houses into a market in Ancaster where the average price is in excess of 6 figures, right? It's over 100,000, actually 7 figures. It's over $1 million. And so there's no one at the front end of the market who's not in the market at the moment, doesn't own a home, isn't coming out with a down payment to buy a house for $1 million. Affordability actually has to be a house that actually is affordable. But fundamentally, policymakers, government, this government in this country has to simply say that housing is a human right and we are going to make it such. The Liberal Party is not saying that, Lisa. Your leader and your party has never said housing is a human right, and as such, we are going to make it the right of everyone in this country to have a home, like Finland has just done, like Norway is trying to do. Yes, it takes time and it takes money, but what it takes is political will. The Democrats have that will. We believe that housing is a human right and that everyone deserves to have a home.
Well, I would say that actions speak louder than words. And in fact, the Liberals have invested $72 billion in poverty reduction and addressing housing availability. So I'm very familiar with the Indwell group in Hamilton that's building not only affordable housing, but housing that's geared to the income of vulnerable people on the streets. I've met these people. I've seen how their lives have been transformed, taken off the street in precarious housing and given a place with a door they can shut and a fridge they can keep their food in that will still be there when they get back. Their lives are transformed. And this is thanks to investments by the Liberal government into local organizations like Indwell and the YWCA that are on the ground dealing with people, listening to them, understanding them, and taking their concerns to Ottawa so that we understand and we can deal with the problem.
Thank you. So we went over a little bit for Malcolm's time, but if there's something, Lisa, that you would like to rebuttal for Malcolm, the clock is starting for you. I'm going to wait.
I think I'm good.
You're good? Okay,
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay, then if we can share our PowerPoint. I have the honor on behalf of HARC to ask each of you the following questions, for which I invite you to stay within a 5-minute time frame. Each of the questions will be posted on the PowerPoint as well. And I will be asking in alphabetical order again, and we will descend, like we will take turns so that it'll be fair to each candidate. Okay. Just give me a moment. So our first question, this will, Alan, we will ask you to answer the question first, and then Lisa, you will go next. Over the last several years, we have seen the hate proliferate online and on social media, allowing hate groups to share bigotry and malice online, to organize with hate groups and attack Black, Indigenous, Muslims, Jews, and other minority ethnic communities and people of color online and in real life. What is your party's plan to tackle this pervasive and persistent issue? Alan.
Oh, thank you. I thought we were going back and forth, but I didn't realize I was up first. So let me just say, New Democrats acknowledge the fact that hate speech online and hate groups online is extremely prevalent. It's not something that isn't there. It's real, and it affects the racialized community, and we have to address that issue. So a few of the ways we would do that is we would actually dismantle far right extremist groups and organizations, including those that promote white supremacy. We look at establishing national standards, and so that you actually, when you look at that hate speech on, which really is a hate crime in my view when it's online, and so that we eradicate that, so that it's not pervasive. It can't just be allowed to flourish, because that's what's happening at the moment. And so we need to look at that stuff in a way that the justice system can actually take action. And so it's not good enough to just say, well, let's just make sure that Twitter or Facebook or Instagram or whoever takes off the piece off of the internet, because stuff always moves around. And so what needs to happen is the justice system needs to be reformed such that they can actually attack that stuff. The justice system, unfortunately, lags slightly behind where social media platforms are. And we've seen that time and time again. And so ultimately what we need to do is two prongs: identify the fact that they're hate groups, not allow it to exist, and then reform the justice system such that we can actually make sure that the justice system puts an end to that, and we stop all of that proliferation of hate that's simply grown exponentially over the last number of years due to social media. If we don't, we will suffer the consequences of that, and racialized folks are suffering those consequences now because of the hate that goes around the internet and between these groups. And so it's absolutely important to us that we put an end to it, and that end can't come soon enough.
Okay. Thank you, Malcolm. Lisa, what is your party's plan to tackle this pervasive and persistent issue?
Thank you. I agree with my fellow candidate that it is an issue that needs to be dealt with here in Canada. I think the Liberal government recognizes this and has already outlawed white supremacist groups like the Proud Boys. And I think of my future colleagues like Mississauga MP Ikra Khalid, who I was joined with at the Hamilton Mountain Mosque a couple of weeks ago. Such an inspiring leader in our country, someone who introduced a private member's bill on anti-Islamophobia and to stop Islamophobia from being so pervasive in our country. These are types of measures that actually work, that get us talking about things like Islamophobia. I mean, right now it's September 11th. It's the anniversary of the 9/11 attacks. And if I think back 20 years ago, I was just starting my career at CHCH News, and that was one of the first things I learned about in the community of Hamilton, is how different groups were affected after the attacks by racism and ignorance. The Muslim community, the Sikh community, at the Hindu temple, where there were fire bombs and all kinds of attacks. We've learned so much. We've been able to amplify those voices and talk about it more and more. We know there's always more to do, but I think the Liberal Party has shown that it's serious about fighting racism, including systemic racism, throughout our institutions, and there's more to do. We have a national action plan on combating hate by 2022 in our platform, and things like these are actions that actually get results.
Thank you, Lisa. And we'll move on to question 2. And Lisa, you will be answering this question first this time. Racism isn't just about how an individual experiences it. Racism is about structures. A class action lawsuit has been filed in the Federal Court of Canada on behalf of Black federal employees. The lawsuit is seeking long-term solutions to permanently address systemic racism and discrimination in the public service of Canada. How does your party plan to address anti-Black and systemic racism in Canada?
Well, first off, we know this is a pervasive issue. There's not one thing that's going to change everything overnight. And that's why I'm happy to say that the Liberal Party has a comprehensive plan and lots of different supports in place to help counter this. So I'm just to list off a few of them. I'm thinking of the plan to have a Black-led philanthropic endowment fund so that we can support Black-led charities within our community, and supports for Black-led businesses and entrepreneurs, as well as women entrepreneurs. There are diversity fellowships and public service and language programs for racialized employees, mental health fund for Black public servants. There's a real drive to make sure that we create more diverse workforces within the federal public service. So it's a multifaceted, multi-pronged approach aiming at really supporting racialized Canadians so they can realize their dreams themselves, give them the tools they need to be successful in whatever that means, in supporting their families and having a home, in realizing their dream careers. The Liberal Party knows that it's not just a one-pronged approach. It has to be multifaceted, and we have to support people where they need support. And it has to be done in collaboration. You don't want the government telling people how to make themselves better. It has to be collaborative. You have to speak with the leaders in the communities and come up with solutions together. It's not something that happens overnight.
Thank you, Lisa. And Malcolm, how does your party plan to address anti-Black and systemic racism in Canada?
Well, one of the ways to do it is we actually have to collect data. And we all understand that systemic racism exists, or at least many of us do. So the issues, as the question suggests, is, well, how do we address that systemic racism? Without data, we need to actually to collect that. We have to collect it with the understanding and the help of the folks that we actually want the data to come from. And so one of the first things we need to do is do that so that we understand where we're headed. A number of things we can do. I touched on carding earlier. Carding is something that's just simply doesn't hold the Charter of Rights. So that just needs to stop. So those are the types of things we would implement right away. It would be the sense that we need to actually end it, not talk about ending it. Now, there's the issue of jurisdiction, of course. We have to talk to the province and get them to stop as well. With the RCP, we can put an end to that. And so that would be part of it. There also is the information through carding. I said this earlier. We simply have to be removed. We can't keep it. When it comes to the federal workforce, we actually have to look at that workforce and say, we have a group of racialized workers who have been treated unequally. In fact, it's shown that when it comes to racialized workers, especially workers, Black workers, that they receive about 87% of the pay of a white worker. And that's in the male side. In the female side, it's actually less. That has to change, where the equity of that has to be that it's the same for both. So in other words, if one's making $1, the other must make $1 as well, not 87 cents. That has to be legislated. It cannot be just sort of allowed to the workplace, because if we allow it to the workplace, it'll continue. We have to actually make sure the legislation is such. We also have a disproportionate number of racialized folks incarcerated. We actually have to start looking at why is that so, and we have to put an end to it. We have to stop incarcerating people of color, especially Indigenous folks and indeed people from the Black community. But that has to end. It's too easy to continue to do that, and so we need to look at the Gladue principle and say, okay, what do we do in this justice system that ensures that we don't have a misrepresentation as far as the ratio of Indigenous people and Black people incarcerated in comparison to the population we represent. It's gone on for too long. We need to actually continue to make sure that those reforms in the justice system are enacted to make sure that we no longer are incarcerating people of color to the extent that we are today. And so those are a few things to sort of to get things moving and to start to talk about systemic racism, to address the issues that are there. And we need to actually take those concrete actions. We can't talk about it because we've talked about it too long. I'll probably say this more than once. I've said it more than once now, but I'm going to say it again. We've been talking about systemic racism for decades, and some for even longer than that. It is time to act, and acting has to actually happen now, not tomorrow or next week. It has to actually happen now.
Thank you.
May I respond? Or are we leaving?
Yeah, we're gonna move forward. We can have some time afterwards for responding if we have enough time and to honor everyone's time. I hate being the person who has to say that, but I have to. So our next question is the Assembly of First Nations recent report titled The Healing Path Forward 2021 Federal Priorities for Strengthening and Rebuilding First Nations reflects a shared vision and expression of First Nations collective priorities at the national level. It identifies specific action items for the incoming government based on 5 priority areas, which I will repeat. Truth, reconciliation, and healing for First Nations and all Canadians. Climate and conservation leadership for First Nations. Economic growth, prosperity, and wealth building for the First Nations. Promoting peace by respecting First Nations jurisdiction. And rebuilding and strengthening First Nations. Let me know if you would like me to repeat the list, or if we can have it on, if you could see it. Okay, so we're good. So Malcolm, it's going to be your turn to answer this question first then. What is your party's plan to implement these 5 priority areas? And I can always repeat anything if you would like me to.
Actually, it's helpful if you actually just leave the 5 pieces up, if you can.
Yeah. Can you see them on there? It's good?
I can.
Okay, good.
And so, I mean, the first piece obviously is to enact the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's action plan. Is actually get it done. Let's not talk about it any longer. We need to actually get the action plan implemented and move it forward. Our commitment would be to implement it right away, not to delay any longer, but to actually make sure that it's done. When it comes to the climate and conservation, when looking at the leadership of the First Nations, we have to talk to them about what are their goals, what roles do they want us to play in conjunction. It has to be a harmonious relationship where we're talking to each other and we're actually listening to what is being said, and then take action from there. Not take action in the sense of, well, we know how to do this, so therefore here's the action and here's what you're going to get. It has to be actually sitting down and talking to those leaders and saying, let's work on this together. We all live on this planet together. There is only one of this planet to live on for us. And so it is important for all of us actually to live in that way, that we're actually speaking to one another and we're actually working together in the same direction with a clear understanding of where we want to go. Economic growth and prosperity and wealth building for First Nations is some First Nations have talked about in different ways across this country. We have to be there to support them, but only in the way that they ask us to support them, not in a way that suggests that they have the right ideas. They will tell us what their ideas are, and we will look at how do we support them. For too long, through the Indian Act, which unfortunately still has that title, we've been telling First Nations peoples across this country, this is what you should do. I don't believe we have that right to tell them what to do. They have a right to determine for themselves. And within that right, we can, if they wish us to invite us to, support them. And if they choose not to, then we should stay aside. We don't have to do anything if they don't wish us to do anything. It's not for us to impose upon them. It's for us to be theirs, to support if the deed as a federal government, if that's what they want us to do. And if not, then we should simply allow them to continue on the path they've chosen. You know, promoting peace and respecting First Nations jurisdiction. I mean, the land acknowledgement that you read at the beginning is part and parcel of that. Those of us who are settlers, and I know that pretty well all of us on this screen tonight are settlers. I certainly know that I'm the most recent one. I'm not sure about the others, but I wasn't born here in this country. I was born in Scotland, and I was born in Glasgow, and came here as a kid with my parents. And so I didn't really have an awareness of First Nations and traditional territories and an understanding until much later in my education process when I was at university, because I came from a place that didn't have the same history. But now I do understand it. And now it is for us as settlers to understand that history of First Nations and to be at peace with them and to be one with them especially when they're asking us to join with them and to be at peace with them. And when rebuilding and strengthening First Nations, it always has to be about how do they see that? And what do they see as our role? You know, do we have a role to play? They can tell us that. They can invite us to that. Maybe they don't wish to invite us. Maybe they're saying, look, you know, we're okay if you allow us to do this. If you don't, not allow us, but if we do this, simply stay out of the way. But they also, my experience with First Nations folks that I know and some of the leadership has always been, they invite you in and say, how do we work together? And because that is part of their tradition, is wanting to work with folks. It's a reason they call us settlers in many cases, is because they've invited us in to settle with them and be one with them. And we have to continue to build policies around that so we can actually see both of us, both nations flourish. The First Nations who were here and those of us who are settlers who joined them.
Thank you, Alan. Lisa, what is your party's plan to implement these 5 priority areas?
Thank you. And I do agree with the other candidate that First Nations priorities have to be developed in coordination and with collaboration with First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. I believe that is what the Liberal government has been doing, implementing 80% of the 94 Truth and Reconciliation calls to action. They're either complete or they're well underway. So this government has been working on reconciliation. I remember when Mark Hill was elected chief of the Six Nations in 2019, he told me flat out, this is the first government he felt was listening to Indigenous peoples, and they gave him hope that it was a government who would actually act and give them more rights to self-determination and making money in their own reserve. The Liberal Party has completed the Declaration of Rights of Indigenous Peoples and affirmed the right of First Nations, Inuit, and Métis communities to jurisdiction over child and family services, which we know has been a huge issue throughout Canada for many generations. And it's finally the Liberal Party, in collaboration with these communities, that's doing something about it. The Liberals invested $4 billion in 535 water infrastructure projects, including 99 plants and 436 upgrades. So when we're talking about quality of life on the reserves, 109 long-term water advisories were lifted, 188 short-term advisories were prevented from becoming long-term, and the Liberal government is committed to lifting the rest of those oil water advisories and building the infrastructure in all of those reserves so that people have safe water to drink. The Liberal Party is protecting first languages of First Nations people. And we continue to co-develop and invest in a distinction-based mental health and wellness strategy, something that could only be done in collaboration with Indigenous people. We are committed to expanding the Aboriginal Entrepreneurship Program, which is a zero-interest business loan for Aboriginal people. And we want to foster a Canadian system of health that is free of racism and discrimination. So that is something that the Liberal government has been working on. And I'm really proud of the accomplishments, even though we know there are still more to do. And the Liberal Party is committed to doing the work necessary, the long-term, difficult work that doesn't happen overnight, that requires investment and time. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. The next question. All political leaders have spent the last 2 years talking about how Islamophobia and discrimination are unacceptable, yet Bill 21 continues to exist. Bill 21 enshrines second-class citizenship in Canada for Quebec Muslims, Jews, and Sikhs. While part of Bill 21 was struck down through legal challenges, many provisions of it remain on the books. What is your party doing in terms of real commitments to stand against second-class citizenship in Canada? This question first goes to Lisa. So
I just realized I was on mute. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I did the same thing. Thank you, Lisa.
Okay, so the Liberal Party has committed to reforming immigration programs to expand ways for people to get their permanent residency, or to expand the ways that permanent residents can get their full citizenship, and to help international students also become citizens. The Liberals plan to welcome 2,000 skilled refugees to come and fill labor shortages in places like healthcare, where we know we need workers, and to work with provinces to help facilitate the moving of skilled people from other countries and get their skills recognized here in Canada in places like healthcare, where we need doctors and nurses and other people. The Liberals are going to require Crown corporations to implement gender and diversity reporting. So that's also important when we're talking about this immigration. And it's something that the Liberals have been working on for some time.
Okay, thank you, Lisa. Malcolm, what is your party doing in terms of real commitments to stand against second-class citizenship in Canada?
Well, clearly, our leader has stood at the forefront. I mean, as a practicing Sikh, Jagmeet Singh has stood in the vanguard of, crying out for and exposing those who perpetrate hatred and Islamophobia, and whether it be anti-Semitism or whether it be racism, systemic racism. It's something he has done all his life, something he continues to do as a leader of a national party across the country. There have been a number of incidents obviously reported on YouTube and elsewhere where he's been accosted as someone of color and as a practicing Sikh, and has stood firm to that and stood up to that racism and shown how it is that you're able to actually take that on head on. One of the things that he's made sure that all of us in the party understand is that we should never be silent, that we have to take it on, that we can't just simply ignore it, we can't walk away from it. And that includes folks who are like me, who don't have to bear that burden of being attacked. And so it is for all of us to make sure that we're always challenging those who are perpetrating racism against whoever it happens to be. And so we need to continue to do that. I mean, we can't allow what we've seen. We can't allow folks to be killed across this country, as we saw recently in Nova Scotia with a young Sikh man who was murdered, or the Muslim family that was decimated in London, Ontario, where they were run down on the street, and with only one young child of that family being a survivor. Those are the things that we have to stand to and say, these are not going to be tolerated. The full impact of the law has to come forward. And by standing up to it, by calling it out at every opportunity, we have to drive it out of the society. We cannot continue to just simply turn a blind eye or turn a deaf ear, which some folks have done for far too long. And so with leaders, a leader like Jagmeet, who sort of instills that in us as a party and as candidates, and with leaders in the caucus like Matthew Green from here in Hamilton Centre, who talks about racism and systemic racism and helps all of us understand what it feels like, what it's like to be the subject of that racism. Helps those of us who want to stand tall, gives us a better understanding in how to do that, how to call it out, so that we are doing that, just not only as policymakers, but in our daily life. Because we can have all the policies in the world, if we're not calling it out, then it'll continue. And waiting for some sort of enforcement from the police or the justice system. But as we as a general society, especially folks who look like me, call it out when we see it. Don't let it go by. Make sure you identify it, call it out. We'll put ourselves on a path to eventually eradicating systemic racism and Islamophobia and anti-Semitism across this country. But it'll take all of us making sure that we do that.
Farhana, you're muted.
Thank you. Thank you, Malcolm and Lisa. Muhammad Ali taught us that hating people because of their color is wrong. And it doesn't matter what color does the hating. It's just plain wrong. I will add that hating a person because you feel superior or privileged is not a reason to tolerate. It is a reason to question why you feel superior and what you can do to embrace a culture of respect and honor the diversity of Canadians, because we all deserve to live in dignity. Hark and our partners wish you a wonderful evening. We hope that this evening's discussion helps you make an informed vote. Voting day is September 20th. We thank Lisa Hefner and Malcolm Allen, and I will give each of you 1 minute now so that you can have a closing remark and say anything that you would like that is important to you. And thank you.
Shall I start?
Sure. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to come and talk with you guys today. I would say HCCI has been such a strong organization in Hamilton. As a journalist, it was a place I would always go to talk to people like Kojo about how systemic racism affects people in our society. It's one of the privileges of my platform as a journalist was to be able to share stories and amplify stories like Kojo's and like people on the reserve after Six Nations, after the Truth and Reconciliation report. Talking to people firsthand and amplifying their voices has been such a privilege. I've learned so much from people. Part of the reason I'm now running to be a Liberal candidate is so I can do more than just amplify those voices. So I can take those voices to Ottawa and affect change. And I think Hamilton Mountain deserves and is ready for a member of Parliament who can actually affect change for them. So thank you very much for your time tonight. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you, Lisa. And Malcolm.
Well, thank you very much. And it's been a pleasure to be here with all of you and to talk about really important issues that for too long are not part of the mainstream, if you will, of political discourse, to be truthful. When it comes to elections. And so it's a great opportunity to get front and center and talk about systemic racism. It exists. It's not something that, unfortunately, people like Premier Legault in Quebec, who says it doesn't exist. My youngest daughter and her husband live in Montreal. It exists. They know it exists. And so it is something that we have to address. It's not something we can just simply push to the side and hopefully it will just go away or somehow it will get cured. New Democrats have pledged to do that through policy, through implementation of new laws that would actually eliminate systemic racism. It can't be about talking about it anymore. It can't be about taking a knee and talking about it. It actually has to be about getting it done. And so Lisa's right. It is about making sure that the folks of Hamilton Mountain get good representation and get a great advocate and get someone who can get things done. I have someone who has a track record because I've been there before. I have a track record of getting things done for folks that I represent. And that's what I intended for the folks here in Hamilton Mountain. So once again, thank you all very much for the opportunity to be here. Thank Lisa for being here as well. It was a pleasure to see you and have our first discussion, because it is our first one. And I look forward to more discussions as the time goes on between now and the 20th. Thank you all.
Thank you again, Malcolm and Lisa. Now I have the honor of introducing Kojo Dempty, Executive Director of Hamilton Civic Inclusion. Kojo.
Yes, thank you very much. As you know, the Hamilton Center for Civic Inclusion has been doing work around civic engagement, civic inclusion, tackling systemic racism and other forms of discrimination here in Hamilton since 2001. And I think it's important to hear from all the candidates. As you know, we started having these roundtables on Thursday. We started with Hamilton Center, Hamilton West, Ancaster, Dundas, and today Hamilton Mountain. On Monday, we'll be talking with some of the candidates from Hamilton, East Stony Creek, and then on Tuesday, Flamborough, Glanbrook. So we hope you'll be able to join us. A big thank you to all the partners that have been working to draft some of the questions that you heard today. So the City of Hamilton, their intergovernmental and community initiatives department, McMaster School of Social Work, Dr. Mio Joseph, the Disability Justice Network of Ontario, the Afro Canadian Caribbean Association, Hamilton Anti-Racism Resource Center, the Legal Clinic, and the Hamilton Roundtable for Poverty Reduction. Thank you very much for your work. And as many of you know, advanced polling started yesterday. So they started yesterday and are running all the way to September the 13th. Polls are open from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. And for those of you that live on the mountain and in Hamilton in general, and those of you from across the country that are tuning in, the candidates that are going to be on the ballot for Hamilton Mountain are Malcolm Allen from the New Democratic Party, Jim Enos from the Christian Heritage Party of Canada, Lisa Hefner, Liberal Party of Canada, Al Mouse, Conservative Party of Canada, Chelsea Taylor, People's Party of Canada, and Dave Urquhart, Green Party of Canada. And this is from Elections Canada's website. So don't want to give you any false information. That is what I have here straight from Elections Canada's website for Hamilton Mountain candidates. So thank you very much. And thank you to Malcolm and Lisa for joining us. And we hope you join us on Monday afternoon, 1 o'clock, with the Hamilton East Stony Creek candidates. So good night and have a weekend. Have a good weekend, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. You too.
Bye.